You've probably heard that ego is the enemy. But what if I told you that's only half the story? The ego and the spirit are like two voices inside us, constantly shaping our choices, our growth, and our experience of life. Today, we're diving into the relationship between the two, how to listen, when to trust, and why both are essential for a balanced, powerful life. Let's explore the dance between spirit and ego. I'm your host today, Michael Perry, and I'm joined today by my mentor and teacher, Justin. This is the new Ashla Podcast. So when we look at the ego, it's commonly misconstrued as a bad thing. We talk about people having big egos and being tyrannical because they're egotistical, but that's not all that ego is. Wouldn't you say, Justin?
Yeah, I know I would. People do say that stuff because they're misinformed of the vital role that the ego actually plays within our being.
I completely agree. I mean, whether we like it or not, we all have an ego. And the more we try to fight against that, the more we're at war with ourselves, I feel. I know you and I have spent a lot of time talking about ego. And one of the things that really fascinated me when I first started my training was when you told me how you had gotten to a point where your ego was more a tool, something you could form to the situations you were going through. And I've spent a lot of time reflecting on that because when you first told me that, it didn't make a lot of sense. But then I started learning about the ego and the role it plays, the benefits of the ego.
Yeah, well, it doesn't make a lot of sense when you hear that because your ego is that thing I am identify with, right? We identify with our ego because it's always been there. That as long as we can remember, at least as long as I can remember, it was that kind of it guided us along. It helped us make decisions, even from the time, like I said, from the time we can remember. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I think you said it best. It's the I am, right? The ego is what tries to give us definition. It tries to give us, it is what the masks we wear are because it's how we try to present ourselves to the world and in turn to ourselves.
Yeah, and that's why and it's always been there. Our spirit's always been there too, but our spirit doesn't generally speaking, for most of us, our spirit isn't prevalent in our conscious thoughts or our conscious day to day. So the ego has always been there. So yeah, it's a difficult thing to hear, and it's weird because it's like, wait a minute, I'm not a tool.
When it's like ego helps us find balance. I mean, there's a lot of roles the ego plays within our lives that is beneficial. It helps us establish boundaries, it helps with our identity, it drives ambition, achievement, self confidence. There are so many purposes and benefits to the ego that if we can learn to work with it instead of against it, that we could truly cultivate a well of inner strength that we have not imagined, at least those who have fought against their egos and have tried to live a life that is devoid of ego.
Yeah, and if you look at the axioms, many of them, they kind of seem anti-ego at first glance. But really what they're attempting to do is balance the ego with something greater than the ego. And the ego has trouble with that because we don't like to think that there are things greater than us, that there are things bigger than us, because the ego helps shrink everything down for us, right? When we're out in the world, it helps personalize things for us depending on where our perception is. So, if, for example, if someone has low confidence or low self-esteem, the ego tends to shrink things. The ego tends to help our perception, our actual perception sometimes. Things tend to get more tight. We want to be wrapped in the blanket, so to speak. The ego helps us with that. It's a survival tool. It helps us navigate the universe and this planet that we're on with all its dangers and stuff, especially at the beginning of humanity. The ego is an
Yeah.
important tool.
No, that's so well said, though, because, man, a lot of what you said I resonated with. I know for me, being a passive person most of my life, my ego wasn't one of when people got in my face, I would turn all big and angry and in their face. It would shrink things down. It would make me overly aware and look at things too much from all sides in a way to minimize the threats that were around me. Yet, in turn, when you are on the other side of the spectrum, it can inflate certain things that are small perceived threats that then become major threats within the eyes of the ego,
Right.
which is also why spirit is so important in this because that's the balance right there. Spirit is intuition, spirit is connection to all things.
Think of it in another way as well. The ego is the lower self, and the spirit is the higher self,
Oh, okay.
right? With the axiom,
It is the job of the higher self, or yeah, it's the job of the higher self to remind the lower self.
close.
Oh, so close. I still remember the conversation we had on this, and that actually, this conversation already has shed more light on that axiom than I even first grokked my first round through. Because you're right, it is the lower self. And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing.
No,
But
just like think of it like lower in vibration. Think of it as the grounding tool because we must exist both in spirit, connected to the cosmos, but also grounded, connected to the earth and the earth's inhabitants and all the things here too. We're being pulled in two different directions, not in a bad way. When they're unbalanced, they're being pulled in a bad way.
right.
So the spirit is the higher self. It doesn't make it greater than. It's not the greater self. It is the higher self.
Oh, that's so well said. And I wonder how many people do you think struggle with the ego and the spirit pulling them in opposite directions?
All of us.
Okay, touche,
Every
touche.
single one of us from time to time. Yeah.
I'll never forget when we went over that axiom, and I started at that was when we had one of the deepest conversations with, and I was asking like, so how do we get to a place where we are constantly our higher selves? And I'll never forget what you told me. It's like that's not possible. The goal isn't to become your highest self.
You
The
already
goal is to
are.
learn. Yeah, you
You already are. You already are both your higher self and your lower self. They have different, I don't want to say agendas, but they have different
purposes.
purposes. Yeah, different purpose, which is why they connect differently. A lot of traditions will say you can connect spirit to earth from a certain perspective, but really the higher self is that self that is connected to the cosmos in totality, not a greater self, but a higher self. It's just higher because that's the positioning of where it is. The spirit is connected to the entire cosmos. The ego, which will die upon our death, I believe.
I believe that as well.
So, but the ego has an important job to keep us grounded and and to help us be human while we take this journey.
Right,
Because we have to. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. Spirit is already spirit. It's already perfect in a sense. In the sense of cosmically speaking, it's perfect, right?
right. Well, it's
But
like I like how you phrase that about it being so high up because it's with it. It has such an aerial view of all things that the ego, the lower self, is what is presented with the now and the moments in front of us and the decisions we have to make, the hard conversations we have to have, the balance between who we are and who we want to be.
yeah, there has to be a balance to live a good, fulfilled, purposeful life. Um, back to times where now that you have this perspective of harmony and balance, think back to times where you were either too grounded or not grounded enough. And think about how you felt. Think about how life got a little harder or a lot harder in some cases. And it was until you kind of start finding that harmony between the higher and lower selves, the spirit and the ego, where things tend to start flowing your way. They tend to start clicking to your favor.
Right.
Now,
Yeah, I mean synchronicities, right?
right. Now there's 1,001, probably 100,000,001 ways to work to find that balance. There's lots of different flavors of cookies out there, right? It doesn't really, one's not better than the other. It just matters what works for you. That's why, when I have a student and we're learning meditation and they say, which one's the best? And I will say, I don't know. Keep practicing them all until you find one that works for you best.
I think we've had that
We
conversation within
have.
my training.
I can't tell you what the best meditation is because you haven't tried them all yet. I don't know. It just really depends on you. So, I never advocate for the right way to harmonize and find that balance. It's really dependent upon you and what works best for you. Some people find that through Christianity, some find that through Islam, some find that through Judaism or Buddhism or Taoism or Jediism or Noism, right? Some people can
Yeah.
find it without Noism. Some people find it through psychology. Some people find it through metaphysics. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. And
Well, I
that's
think this
why,
ties right back into authenticity.
well, it does because you have to find what works best for you. And that's why, sometimes I'll have people come to me and explore teachings and things like that. And we discover that, well, my flavor of cake isn't your thing and no hard feelings, but we still have a friendship. We still have connection, but I would suggest you go on and keep searching until you find the thing that really, really resonates for you. And
Right.
that's why really our philosophy and our teachings blend well with all of the light oriented paths that I've discovered in my lifetime. They blend well because, there is a foundational component here that we all share. Just sometimes people can grow a little better with this flavor versus the other one. And it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. It's really just trying to seek that balance and that kind of harmony between these two selves.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that surprised me the most when I got on this journey, when I finally was able to go through this with the open mind of a child, just consider myself as knowing nothing. And as I started looking at my old understanding of how the world works, it was a good mirror for how I see things now. It was a more restrictive system only due to the fact that it was its own path. And as we walk this path, we realize that this is an interconnectedness of multiple paths, trying to lay bricks from each one to formulate a way to our best lives. But they all interconnect. I mean, one of the things we've talked about before, I was very Christian, and yet I was always fascinated with Hinduism, Buddhism,
Hmm.
and all these other subsets, and there would be these little other puzzles I was looking at that gave me answers, but at the same time I didn't want to jump into them because I had my belief system. And as I opened my mind to all this stuff, slowly I realized it was all the same puzzle.
Yeah. Yeah. Or at the very least, it has all the same number of pieces. It's just the picture might be different. One thing to note, however, is that you must seek authentically. And what I mean by that is oftentimes we see people will bend or cut or trim a philosophy, an established philosophy, to fit them instead of growing and changing to fit the established philosophy. And what we end up finding is that people who do that for a long time, they still find that they haven't found anything. They still find that void within them because they didn't act. They didn't try to grow. They just took the shortcut and just cut something into 1,000 little pieces and tried to bend it to their will instead of
Right. Well, and there was
surrender.
also just the fact of, I mean, like you said, shortcuts. I think one of my biggest issues I used to have, as we've talked about before on the show, is I was looking for that quick fix. I was looking at how do I erect a system of values and understanding that matches my life and allows me to justify my existence. And that's not it. You justify your existence through yourself, but it's cultivated through effort. It's cultivated with time and patience and practice, 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 right?
Right.
It's when you go through this, and when he talks about authenticity, we're talking about understanding yourself on a level where you can work with yourself, where you are not afraid to be yourself, at least at the minimal with yourself. Because so many of us try to blend into social cliques, into what is popular, and we lose ourselves in that. But the more we can get to our true essence, our true desire, our true understanding, the more when we find one of these paths, will it resonate with us? And when we find the path that resonates with us, it is to take each step and not try to find a way to hurry through the path until you get to the other side. It's the journey that matters.
Yeah, and I'll just say that your mere existence requires no justification. The fact that you are listening to this and you exist on this planet with us is already almost an impossible set of circumstances.
Yeah.
I mean, it's literally like one in some, I don't
Well, I
remember.
can't remember if it's trillions or billions, but I think it's
Trillions,
trillions.
I think. It was like one in, I don't remember. Don't quote me on that. It's been a minute since I listened to him speak about that. But yeah,
We are a speck floating in space, and you are a speck upon the speck that has life and consciousness and the ability to live compared to any other life form on this planet.
and you have sentience. You can
Yeah.
decide. You get to decide. None of us asked to be here, but then we get to decide. And that being authentic in our search and in our seeking and in our journeys takes us back to ego because the key is to surrender. And the ego does not like surrender.
Ain't that the truth? The letting go we talk about a lot.
A
Yeah.
lot. And really, when we say letting go, we just mean surrender to the moment or surrender to whatever it is. Not at the sake of your boundaries. You still must be safe and you still must protect yourself. But surrender is a big part of any path, any belief, any religion, anything. So the ego doesn't like that. The spirit has nothing to surrender to. The ego must be made to surrender, and that's usually where we start running into problems, is in the surrendering.
Right. Well, it's like the dark night of the soul, right? It's when we have when our worldview all of a sudden has two conflicting beliefs, where we have to completely reassess not only the world we live in, but how we show up in it. When we're going through this dark night of the soul, the key to getting through the darkness for anyone listening, it is surrender. It is letting go of what your ego is so desperately trying to hold on to. Because I guarantee you, in the dark night of the soul, your ego is at the root of the suffering, or at least is the thing that is perpetuating the root.
Yeah, but we have to be careful about blaming the ego for everything. As you
Yeah,
said in your introduction to the show, it's like it gets blamed for literally everything almost. It's never blamed for anything good. It's always blamed for all the bad stuff. Really,
true.
what's to blame in all of this is disharmony.
Yeah,
The ego, yes, the ego must be made to understand its role in the grand scheme of your being. Oftentimes we find that it fights and it holds on it and it refuses to surrender no matter how much we try to make it, which is ironic because it is one half of us in this conversation. It's one half of us, and yet we are sometimes powerless to it. But it's us. Shouldn't it bow to our will? Well, it just easier said than done, like most of the things on this path. The ego is not something to be discarded or destroyed. Just like the dark, we don't seek to destroy the dark because that too is a part of us. We seek to harmonize with it. We seek to teach the ego to play its part and to play its part the best it can, because it does have a very important part to play. And again, we hear this a lot and we've heard it for all our lives about the ego is the enemy. And the ego is not the enemy because you are not the enemy and the ego is you.
right.
Because
Well, and it's
there are some benefits to it. It is a tool. It can be an obstacle too, but it is a tool. And we say that. I had just said that the ego is part of you. The ego is you in a sense, at least half of you in this scenario. But you can use it to your benefit, like we would use a tool to our benefit. We would use a hammer to hit nails instead of trying to drive them with screwdrivers. The same thing with our emotions. It's perfectly fine, natural, healthy to experience the wide variety of emotions that we can experience. But those emotional states can also be honed into tools for certain situations.
well, and once you hone them, I mean, there's such a emotions are not a bad thing. I mean, we spend so much of our lives trying to hide from emotions, depending on your walk of life. I know for me, I ran from anger forever.
Hmm.
And through learning to cultivate the ego and learning that when I feel like I never realized what anger felt like in my body. I'm in therapy and talking to my therapist a couple months ago. And it's something we've been sort of talking about is I need to figure out how to feel my anger. And I started describing this situation. She's like, Mike, did you hear yourself? Do you feel what you're feeling? That's anger. And it was that aha moment of that's what this is.
Hmm.
And since then, I've been able to recognize it and I've been able to sort of follow it and allow it to make me take different actions in those moments. I haven't had a ton of practice with it since I started cultivating it, but it was a huge thing. Like, this is what anger feels like. Anger would transmute into anxiety in my body. I thought I dealt with a ton of anxiety through my life. No, that was anger that I would mislead in my body so I wouldn't react unconsciously.
So, what are some benefits of spirit? We've been talking about the ego here.
Well, I think spirit is what connects us to all things. It's what can help us cultivate a sense of purpose in the world, a sense of community. The quiet voice in our hearts that speaks truth. For the spirit is not loud, the spirit is calm always.
It feels like that's where our compassion and our connection and our love come from.
Yeah. And in turn, it's also what can help us liberate ourselves in the letting go, especially for the need to be seen by others or for any form of external validation. Also, your creativity. You'll notice if you're a creative person, that's something that intuitively flows out of you. And if you're not a creative person, if you don't know where your creativity lies, because I believe in spheres of intelligence. I believe that this was a psychological study done a while back that talks about the five areas of intelligence. And I think there's actually a lot more if we were to hone in on it. And it's like you have engineering, you have understanding the world and nature, rocks and plants, and you have social skills, the ability to understand people, and then you have the ability to understand big picture thinking, to look at things from a higher perspective. when it comes to organization within a company. And the more you can pinpoint where your regions of intelligence are, I promise, if you pursue that, you're going to find fulfillment. And you're going to find abundance. Because if you're someone who's good at people and you go into engineering, you're probably going to struggle. Right
Hmm.
now, I work in sort of an engineering field, and I struggle dramatically with a lot of the big technical things we work on because it's just not my realm of intelligence. Yet, if I work with people all day, I can motivate people all the time. That is my biggest resource I provide my company, is I'm great at providing a healthy communicative environment for my employees and peers.
Right. I believe that we are all creators, creative, because we're all creators. We all contain within us the sparks of creation.
Yes.
We are stardust to a fact. We come from space, as all things do, what we would call space. Now, there's lots of debates and lots of things that say what that beginning point was. I'm not interested in having that conversation with anyone because if it helps you be a good person, then more power to you. I won't argue anyone's creation story because really, we don't really know what happened before the act of creation. We just think we know what creation was. But if I work this out on this, just using logic, if we were created, then we are creators because we contain with us parts, particles, pieces, whatever you want to call it, of the creator or of the creators, or like I said, whatever floats your boat. But therefore, we are all creative. We just have to find a way to unlock that because without creativity, it's tough to grow past a certain point, especially on these spiritual paths.
Yeah.
I have my idea of what creation looked like for this universe, but that will be for another show when we talk about the Force. So, but, I just wanted to point out that we are all creators in my mind.
When it's like we're all energy, right? I mean, that's kind of the root. Regardless of your belief, whether you believe the Big Bang or God created us, we are all energy, and energy's purpose is to flow. So when you restrict yourself, if you are someone who is sort of wandering through life without purpose, there's a good chance you're cut off from that energy, that source. And the more you dive into spirit, the more you dive into discovering who you are, and that can take a lot of courage. I know a lot of people who have a lot of possibilities of discovering what it is that drives them,
Hmm.
but it's getting out of their homes and into situations where they can test the waters, try new things, meet new people. That's all it would take for them to start having like we were talking about, synchronicities, the universe lining up with them.
Hmm.
And when energy becomes stagnant, I believe the energy then turns inwards and is self destructive. Idle hands do the devil's deeds, right?
Right. Well, I'll take this a step further because I just realized that maybe I was being too vague about the idea that we are all creators. I'm not saying that all of us can draw, not all of us could be Da Vinci, create music, those kinds of things. Those things are beautiful and wonderful, and without them, this world would suck really badly. Because I can't draw worth a crap. I can't do certain artistic things, but I am definitely a creator. And so are you, and so are you, and you, and you, and you, and you. And here's what I mean. Every thought, every whisper, everything you think and feel and do and choose creates ripples that literally start from you and touch the edge of the infinite universe and then come back. So everything you do potentially creates chaos or order, or it creates disharmony and harmony. So don't ever think that not one of you out there is a creative force, because you are, whether you like it or not. That's why we always try to do our best to be solid in our thinking, in our feeling, in our doing, because everything we do, both good and bad, creates ripples and consequence. So I just wanted to point that out. I just wanted to kind of elaborate on that a little bit, what I meant.
No, I'm glad you threw that in there because that's such an important point. I mean, that's one thing I think many of us try to avoid looking at in life, but all actions, all decisions, everything has a ripple and it reaches out to the people we love and beyond. So the important thing to know is what are the ripples you are making in your life? Even keeping to yourself can be a ripple in itself. There is purpose, there's potential when there is purpose, but potential still exists even in stagnation.
That's right, but it's still a thing.
Yeah.
It still exists. It's still going to become something once you create it. And we all create. We all create. The thing is, A lot of folks don't understand that they are responsible for that. Nobody teaches us these things when we're little, when we're growing up. Some do, but most don't. Most don't know that the way they think, the way they feel, the way they act out creates something. And it can create something good or create something bad. This is why, in the four agreements, we're taught to be impeccable with not just our word, but with how we listen, how we accept, how we agree to things. Every single thing that we do is an act of creation in one way or the other, and it will create consequences. It's difficult for people to take responsibility for that because they simply just don't know. They don't know or they don't believe that that is a thing, but it's damn near verifiable at this point.
Yeah.
Science is really starting to catch up to a lot of things that these mystics have been saying for thousands of years. So,
That's one of the most exciting things since I started this journey is just seeing all the research that is happening nowadays around this stuff. I mean, they're finding science to synchronicity, which was something that was such a concept beforehand, but there is validity to it. I think one important thing I want to touch on before we get too far ahead that I brought up earlier is listening to these voices, knowing how to distinguish what is the voice of the ego and what is the voice of the spirit. Now, I touched a bit on my thoughts with ego and spirit, on one being a loud voice, one being a more calm and nurturing voice. What are your thoughts on this?
if our ego is disharmonious, corrupted, see, I don't think, again, I'll go back to where I don't think the ego is bad, but when the ego is not functioning properly, when it doesn't understand its role in our being,
Or we're overly identified with it.
right, then it's in a state of disharmony, and you won't hear anything other than it yelling at you all the time, trying to take on the role. And I know we talk about these things, the spirit and ego, as if they are conscious beings. They're not, but they are a part of you, both your conscious and unconscious being. The
Yeah.
spirit being the more, as you said, the more quiet one. It whispers. It leads us to something, and we may not be aware, or it'll guide us. The spirit is really what moves us left when we need to go left, and right when we need to go right, up or down, to help us find balance, because the spirit in our beliefs, because on this path and in these teachings we believe in the force. The spirit is that thing that is of the force, and it seeks to move us side to side, up and down, depending on where we need, because sometimes we're oriented too far this way or that way, and it seeks balance. The spirit really only wants us to find balance. As the ego, it doesn't really understand that concept very well, because it's, I'll put it like this. We were talking about the benefits of the ego earlier. It helps set boundaries, and it helps us create identity so that we can interact with the world. It helps drive our ambition and our achievements, and it helps us provide self-confidence and self-esteem. It protects us from things outside of us. And it usually, I'll say that it probably always has our best interest at heart, but it tries to take on everything. And this is where we start to struggle with control versus surrender, right? So the ego is the control center and spirit is the surrender. And those two things, as we said before, they conflict a lot, because the spirit isn't fighting the ego, but the ego's trying to protect us from all things.
Well, and you said it so beautifully, how it tries to take on everything. Think of people you know that are extremely controlling and micromanaging. Their goal is to handle everything because they can't release that control and trust their peers or their coworkers or their families. I know many people like this. They want to take the world on their shoulders to not be a burden to others and therefore make sure all things that come to completion are done so as perfectly as they can imagine because it's easier to have their dreams come to light than the trust and the vision of others to help make a better dream.
Right. It's why alchemy is so important. Alchemy is a higher practice. And we're not talking about turning lead into gold. Literally, we're talking about figuratively helping our lower selves connect with our higher selves harmoniously.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to touch on too, because yeah, alchemy isn't necessarily transmuting lead to gold, but it's transmuting your emotions, transmuting these drives into greater things. And I think when it comes to the drives of both of these, I mean, the ego seeks validation, the ego seeks control, but the spirit seeks truth and harmony, like you said.
Well, the ego is here to protect us, and it looks for validation because the ego looks for evidence. It looks for, it's the thing that measures. It's the thing that weighs. It's
Yeah.
the thing that keeps us grounded to the material world, not to hurt us, but to protect us. But it's like a helicopter mom. You've heard that term, the old
Yeah.
helicopter mom. It just never relents if you're not careful. It's just constantly not letting you skin your knee, and it doesn't let you do these other things.
Well, and it's like balance, right? I mean, I'll say I can't say I had a helicopter mom, but I had a mother. I love her to death. She is an amazing mother, one of the most amazing women I know.
She is a pretty amazing woman. I will say that.
But she spent my whole childhood, she taught me to fear everything. And it wasn't because she wanted me to be afraid of the world, but it's because she wanted me to be safe. I remember I rode my bicycle 2 times. I had a bicycle for practically 2 days as a kid, and I took it out on the street, and she's like, a car's gonna come down, it's gonna hit you, you're gonna be paralyzed. And she took it away, and that was my childhood. And again, it wasn't a bad childhood. I had a good childhood, but I learned to be afraid of things, which is part of why I struggle with flight and freeze over fight, is because that was my upbringing. And again, it's never about blaming your parents. It's just using your past as a way to understand yourself better.
Mhm.
But yeah, to your point, it wasn't necessarily egotistical. It was just the
No,
need for control
right,
of love through love, or lovingly controlling to provide the safest outcome for her son, which
right.
I understand that.
And that's what your ego does for you.
Yeah,
That's what it's trying to do. It doesn't. I know there'll be people out there that will disagree with me on this, and they'll die on this hill. But I don't see the ego as being a bad thing, an evil thing, a dark thing. It's a necessary component of our being. It just
I
has
agree with you on that,
it,
though.
we just have to watch for the corruption of our ego. So there's an axiom: fear, doubt, and confusion propel the ego into action. Disaster is inevitable if one cannot abandon his or her attachment to agenda. And when you look at this axiom, it talks about these lower states of being: fear, doubt, confusion propel the ego into action. Well, what action is it propelling the ego into? It's propelling it into protection mode, wall mode. Get in the bunker now, now, now. The sky is falling. That's what the ego does. It protects us. Sometimes it does too good of a job, because when it runs from everything, when it tries to wall us off and protect us from anything, then we start to become stagnant. We start to not grow anymore.
And we begin cutting off connection,
Right.
which
Yeah,
is vital.
it is. It's
I mean,
because,
the point of relationships is to mirror ourselves back to us. When we have relationships, they act as mirrors into our soul, and they reflect back to us who we are as a person. And when the ego tries to control everything, when the ego starts doubling down, we end up cutting connection because we're too afraid of the mirrors being reflected back to us, especially when it goes into haywire mode. In those dark days,
we have a corruption of our ego. It's disharmonious because it really seeks to, like your wonderful mother, it seeks to protect you from everything. And we can't be protected from everything, or we won't grow. We won't learn anything.
there's a lot of studies showing now with children, the more you give them autonomy, the more you allow them to learn lessons on their own, the more confident they are, the more
Right.
self reliable they are, especially as they get older. Because as they learn to what is good and bad on their own terms, they can cultivate a stronger sense of self.
And the thing we have to remember too, and this is a theme that we go with because it's an important one, we say it a lot. Those things that are corrupt within us require time and attention and patience to overcome, to reform, to harmonize.
To retrain, I mean, I like to look at the unconscious mind as a whole bunch of mountain ridges. And you've built these ridges up your whole life on how to show up in the world and how to go about living, because life is a struggle, life is suffering. And when you start to do this work, it's kind of like a needle on a record, slowly trimming these mountains down as you build new ones
Mhm.
and replace those old beliefs, those old patterns with new ones, stronger ones, more empowering ones. And that's so pivotal in this journey because it's practice, 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 and patience, patience, patience. We're probably at 100 times saying this in 10 episodes.
And we're going to say it 1,000 times more because it's important.
Yeah. So, how would we go about merging these two? How can we utilize spirit and ego to our advantage? How can we make these two forces within our side selves work for ourselves?
Well, so The best way to approach this in a way that I can explain it, not because I'm so much more smarter than everyone else, but because it's a very difficult thing to explain. I think we have to look at the nature of attachment. This is where I taught you and I teach my other students, because this seems to be the first doorway that we must move through for everyone. The nature of attachment is the nature of the struggle between ego and spirit. Now, you hear a lot saying, you hear everywhere you go in these circles of spirituality and philosophy and these things like this, that attachment's bad, attachment's bad, attachment's bad, ego's bad, ego's bad, ego's bad. Well, it depends on what you mean by attachment. Attachment, a good healthy attachment, would be something like, I love my wife. We love and we grow with each other. I don't fear losing her, because that allows her to be free and to have her free will, and she can decide to do whatever she needs to do or whatever she wants to do. I do not control her in any way, shape, or form. I love her unconditionally. There are no conditions on my love for her. If she were to hurt me or wrong me, I still love her. We may not still be together after that, whatever it may be, especially if it's something really, really bad or hurtful, but I still love her. So there are no conditions placed on her love. When we can love people completely free, then but I do find myself wanting to be around her. So I am in some way attached to her existence, right?
Yeah, it's a
That
great example for this.
that is an example of a good attachment, a healthy attachment.
Yes.
A bad attachment, the kinds of attack, when you hear somebody say, or you hear me say, let go of your attachments, what I'm about to tell you is the kind of attachments I'm talking about. The attachments that you fear to lose, or you can't live without, or I would die without. Now, someone will say, Justin, that's a very nice sentiment. Someone to say, oh, I would die without them. It sounds nice, but what they're saying is, I am going to clutch onto this white knuckled for as long as I can, and then when it is ripped away from me by force, I'm going to crumble into dust. I fear to lose. So let me put this back on the same example. I love my wife so much that I don't let her talk to anyone. I don't let her go anywhere. She's not allowed to have a job. I control all the money, all the resources, and I don't let her do anything. That is a bad attachment, because I am holding on so tightly that I fear to lose her, that it ends up becoming very, very, very problematic for both of us, right? So now that we have those two things established, and no one out there better create a soundbite saying that I do this stuff. I've told Michael before that I'm always careful about what I say in case someone can make a soundbite and make it sound like I'm just this horrible dude. But anyways, so those two examples of attachment, I think, play a role here when we think about the ego and the spirit pulling on each other. The first example would be a healthy balance between the ego and the spirit, where you are practicing these higher ideals of free will and unconditional love and all this, but you're still attached to the person in a way where you want to be there, you want to be around them, you like being around them, all this stuff, right? So
Yeah.
that's a very healthy relationship between the ego and the spirit. The other way is because the ego is much louder, it's much more prevalent in our consciousness. It seeks to dominate, it seeks to control, because it fears losing you. It fears losing everything. It fears not existing. It fears whatever you can think of. So that's where I start with people, and that's where I started with you, because it is the best doorway to go through.
Well, it's so important. I mean, I know, God, it was truly attachment. I love that you brought that up as the gateway, because there is so much truth to that. When I was going through the training, I was dealing with a really rough attachment. And one thing I've noticed in relationships, if you're highly attached to someone, there's a good chance that this person is mirroring or triggering old wounds kept inside of you. And man, this situation I was dealing with was hitting every trauma I had known and bringing it all to the surface. And right before Justin and I started talking, I was starting to do shadow work, and that's dangerous to do when you're in a dark place, especially alone. That's really what prompted me and made me so dedicated to this training, is because as I started to look at the lessons he was teaching me, and the first lesson was attachment. It was the three major causes of suffering, which is judgment, attachment, and unspoken expectation. And the attachment, the emotions I was feeling were all stemming from an attachment to a situation, an attachment subconsciously to fix what I couldn't fix in my youth and in my later years. And man, attachment can drive us so dangerously when it's not unchecked. I mean, even like we've talked about with parents, workplaces, when someone is trying to control every aspect, they become tyrannical. And that's not unconditional love. That's not trust in the people you are caring for. Because through trust can we work through attachment, through unconditional love and acceptance. Can we truly allow our coworkers, our relationships, our families to flourish? Oh, it's so huge though. I still struggle with attachment. It is truly the first gate. I never thought about it like that, but you're absolutely correct. At least for most situations, we all have our different paths, but that is definitely what attachment can lead to some of the darkest places and is why it's an entry point for many, many people.
Bad attachment always leads to a dark place. Always. Because bad attachment even takes love and turns it into something disgusting. It does. I won't get into it, but look, in my career, I've met a lot of bad people, a lot of bad guys, a lot of bad girls. And every abuser I ever met said that they loved them, and every victim said that they loved them. That's not love, man.
Oh,
So, something even as powerful as love potentially being one of the actual pillars of the entire universe through creation, potentially. I'm sure that could be debated. But a force that strong, when it can be corrupted through attachment, then,
it's dangerous.
well, it is. It always goes to the worst place because, especially when it's allowed to continue. And,
When we're going to be doing an episode here within the next couple of months on love versus attachment because there is a difference. And I think one of the common issues in the world today, why so many marriages truly struggle. I know they have statistics on money and all these other things, but it's not knowing the difference between attachment and love.
yeah, that'll be a good one. I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
it.
I mean, that's what I'm trying to go for with school. My goal is to get my master's in attachment theory because I find so much passion. I'm so fascinated by the concept from our first ever lesson. It's not spoken of enough.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how the only way really to teach good attachment versus bad attachment, and especially when we're talking about love, would be to just mirror good behaviors and loving relationships to children. As soon as they're able to process information, people who grow up in, I don't know, we probably shouldn't get into it because this really could go into a really deep rabbit hole where you really have to pull a lot of data to argue a point. And I'm not trying to argue a point, any point, but yeah.
But you're right,
Look,
mirroring is the most important thing.
all things can be corrupted. Nothing in this universe is beyond corruption. At least not that we know of.
Harmony, right? Too much of anything.
Well, harmony, no, harmony is the perfect state. You can't have too much harmony. Harmony is the perfect state. But you can have too much light and too much dark. You can have
Right. Well, that's where I'm going with that
right,
is with
right,
it.
right. You could have too much ego and or too much spirit. So, but harmony is the state that we try to achieve in all aspects of our being. Tough to do, but it's doable.
Practice, practice, practice.
We may not be able to hold it for long. It's some moments are we can hold on to harmony longer than others in certain moments, but the goal is to keep trying to go back there. If you see the universe in motion, it's not always, not every part of the universe is in perfect harmony all the time, but it's always moving toward perfect harmony. It's always moving itself here or there.
I think another important area where we can find harmony between spirit and ego is utilizing the ego's drive to chase after your goals. The ego, when it wants us to goal, when we align that with the spirit's deeper drive for purpose, especially when we can do it through unattachment, unattached to the outcomes of our goals, unattached to the specific dream you have, but to follow that drive and see what unfolds before you, magic can happen.
It can. It does. Everything syncs up, everything flows. Almost seems like you're the luckiest person on earth. I wanted to point out something because you were talking about the axiom. And the axiom you were talking about is it is the responsibility of the greater self to remind the lesser self of the true nature of things. reflect and meditate regularly on this.
Yes.
I think we need to make, and right here on the air, I'm going to edit an axiom because through this discussion, I've realized that it's not a really good way to describe these two things. This axiom must be changed. It is the responsibility of the higher self to remind the lesser self of the true nature of things, because really, there is no greater or lesser parts of our being. They all are necessary for us, for our whole being, our holistic self. Been talking a lot about holistic lately because
But
that's,
it's important.
well, that's the true nature of all of existence, is that it exists holistically with all other things interconnectedly.
Yes.
So yeah.
When we will be doing an episode on that exact axiom
Hmm.
as we're going through each axiom, however long that takes.
It'll be a while.
That's not a bad thing. Each one is so vital. I'm glad we're dedicating an episode to each one, if not three,
It is.
because each one of these has so much meaning and profound wisdom that could change your life depending on where you're at and what it is you're struggling. One of these axioms will hit that nerve in which you are looking for an answer.
Right. And you know, the way we're doing the Axiom shows, for those out there who are enjoying them, they are meant to be a conversation about the axioms. They are not the official right perfect understandings. And well, there really aren't any official perfect understandings. Like
Uh,
Derek said before, and I don't know if that show ever went to air, but Derek did say, he said to us in our company, Michael, that the axioms were meant to be taken at three different levels of your progression. So
yes.
you're right. Each of them could do three from three different perspectives, and maybe we'll figure that a way to do that. You know, the master level, the knight level, and the apprentice level. That's an interesting thought. We should try that. See how it goes.
Yeah.
See how it goes. Yeah. So, but this lends itself to what I've said, that these teachings are alive. They must adapt and grow as our understandings grow. And this
Yeah.
takes us back to an axiom that we talked about already. We did a fun little show about student is the best teacher. I never realized that this particular axiom put greater importance on one part of the self over the other, and that is not true. They are equal parts to a whole. They both have a function. And if either one of them are corrupted, then you will not function properly. They must be in harmony. So good. I'm glad we had this conversation today because it helps it helps grow our philosophy. It helps grow our teachings too.
Yeah. Well, and it's like one of the things we are seeking to accomplish with the philosophy we are teaching. This isn't something that's going to be written in a book and everyone's going to follow this to the code years after our passing. This is a living, breathing philosophy that adapts, it evolves, it becomes more as the understanding becomes more.
As we become
And
more.
yeah,
Yeah, and there will be books, and there are books, and you'll see a second edition, and a third edition, and a fourth edition, and a 20th edition until Justin dies, and then I don't know what will happen after that. I won't care. Then there'll have to be
I'll do your anniversary releases.
yeah, they'll have to, then Michael or someone else will have to write them, and I don't know how they'll number them, but that's their problem. They'll have to figure that out. I'll be lounging in a chair somewhere maybe, but yeah. So
Well, beautiful. Well, should we wrap this up with an exercise and a journaling prompt?
you know how much I love the exercises and journaling prompts. Yes.
All right. Think back to a time when you knew your spirit and your ego were back talking to you. Try to describe the difference between these two voices. I don't like that. I don't like how that sounds. Think
What?
back to a time.
It sounds like yeah, it sounds like there's a third voice. Who's the third voice?
Think back to a time when your spirit or your ego was talking to you. Describe the difference between these two voices.
How about this? How about this? How about think back to a time when you knew that your spirit and ego were arguing with each other.
Oh, that's good. Step one, think back to a time when your spirit is that. Think back to a time when your spirit and ego were arguing with each other. Describe the difference between these two voices. Step two, describe a time when you followed your ego when you should have followed your spirit. Step three, describe a time when following your ego was actually the right decision. And step 4, think of someone in your life who has a well balanced spirit and ego relationship. What characteristics do they display that has led you to this conclusion? What is it that makes this person well balanced, and what is it you admire about them? What can you learn from their character?
That sounds like a great heart.
Yeah, someone who speaks with their actions more than their words.
Great hearts. All the great hearts out there. All you guys out there have a very good spirit ego relationship. Guaranteed.
Amen. Thank you for joining us today on the new Ashla Podcast. Ad Lucian.
Ad Lucian.